Like, they're like, so what? The public is curious? So we have to give them our transcripts and open up this very sealed box of protection that we've historically afforded to grand jury proceedings. We're just gonna open that up because you're curious? Like, I think the judge is gonna go, get out of here. On July 6th, the DOJ announced the conclusion of their review of the particulars of Epstein's crimes and death. Since then, the public interest in Epstein has remained. You're damn right it has. A fire for righteous indignation at abuses of powers, of commitment to seek justice for victims, of dedication to truth above all else. They're so full of themselves and like detached from reality in America. It's crazy. They talk like this. Motions to unseal are now filed, and we've got two of them in two separate cases. We were wondering if it was just going to be in the Epstein case or just the Gouveia case, but nope, it's both. And so we're going to be looking for grand jury transcripts and testimony and records from those proceedings. And this comes after Trump posted the following. He says, "I have asked the Justice Department to release all grand jury testimony with respect to Jeffrey Epstein, subject only to court approval." Now, on both of these cases, Epstein and Maxwell, she's still alive. She could object to these things. And so it's going to be very instructive to see if she's going to object to the release of any of the materials or if any of the victims who were still associated with that case were. I think there were 4 of them that we covered in that trial. And a lot of people who could object to things. And that case is still kind of active because she's on appeal. She's taken that up to the Supreme Court. Epstein is dead, however. And so maybe his estate will come in, or some other witnesses or some other victims in that case will come up to object to it. But we got 2 battles going on. We'll take a look at both. Now, with that being said, and even if the court gave its full and unwavering approval, which I doubt that they will at all, actually, nothing will be good enough for the troublemakers and radical left lunatics making the request. It will always be more MAGA, which there is some truth to that. I mean, we always want more. I just have to acknowledge the president is calling us out on that because, I mean, that's basically how we stand. We're like, please, sir, can we have another? We're like, we have phase 1. Okay, please, sir, can we have another? Like, you want another one, phase 2? Well, yeah, we want phase 2 and 3 and 4. We're very needy, okay? Give us the files. It's our government. Can't we have them? So we'll see what we ultimately get. Happy to see the motions have been filed. Let's take a look at both of them. Here is what went in to the judge in the Southern District of New York. And remember, Maureen Comey was the one who prosecuted this case, saying, all right, at the direction of the Attorney General, the DOJ hereby moves the court to release grand jury transcripts associated with the above reference indictment. And so a grand jury proceeding is much like a hearing, right? There's a presentation of evidence, calling of witnesses, prosecutors talking, grand jurors sitting there. So you want to read through what happened. What was presented? What did you guys say? On July 6th, the DOJ and the FBI investigation issued a memorandum that we read here describing an exhaustive review undertaken of investigative holdings related to Jeffrey Epstein. The memo, we read it and we were very disappointed in it. The memo detailed the steps taken by the DOJ and the FBI to determine whether evidence existed that could predicate an investigation into uncharged third parties. And that's one thing too. We also went about blackmail and complicity and all the things. Now, as the memo concluded, no such evidence was uncovered during the review. And we know because they didn't really look at much. They looked at 300 gigabytes of video, which was like in Jeffrey Epstein's shoe drawer of DVDs that we saw them pull out in the video files, in the photo files from the trial. Now, since July 6th, there has been extensive public interest in the basis for the memo's conclusions. And this, I don't think, is going to be really persuasive to the courts. Like, they're like, so what? The public is curious? So we have to give them our transcripts and open up this very sealed box of protection that we've historically afforded to grand jury proceedings. We're just going to open that up because you're curious? Like, I think the judge is going to go, get out of here. That's all? That's why? While the DOJ and the FBI continue to adhere to the conclusions reached in the memo, in other words, transparency to the American public is of the utmost importance to the administration, okay? So this is very sneaky. I mean, this is them saying, we disagree with the public. Like, there's a lot of public interest in this, but we don't really even, it's like begrudging. Well, we agree with what we said, and the public is dumb. We want transparency, and so it's public interest in transparency. But like, we don't even think there's really good cause for you to give the material out. Now, given the public interest in the investigative work conducted by the DOJ and the FBI, the DOJ now moves this court to unseal the underlying grand jury transcripts, subject to appropriate redactions of victim-related and other personal identifying information. Okay, so so even if they come out, there's not going to be any names in there. Now, you might be able to backtrace those names and say, well, they're talking about this dude and that guy and this thing, and you could fill in the gaps, fill in the blanks, but there's not going to be any names. And obviously, you wouldn't want the names of the victims anyways. Now, the department will work with the U.S. attorneys for the Southern District of New York to make appropriate redactions of victim-related info and other personal information as well, saying transparency in this process will not be at the expense of our obligation under the law to protect the victims, right? There's rules for victims, which I think appropriate in most cases, not all of them. On July 2nd, a grand jury sitting in the Southern District of New York returned an indictment charging Epstein. And while awaiting trial 1 month later for a big hoax and nothing he ever did wrong at all, or actually he did the bad things, but no one else did anything bad at all, Epstein committed suicide in his cell soon a month later under Bill Barr's stewardship. Soon after, the court dismissed the indictment and no evidence came out. Isn't that interesting? There's no discovery, there's no trial, no witness testimony, nothing. He's dead. Case is closed. On June 29th, the grand jury then, sitting in the Southern District of New York, 2020, charged Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine, with numerous offenses related to trafficking and coercion of minors. In December 2021, we covered this trial. A jury found Maxwell guilty on several counts, 240 months in prison. She's now appealing it. On July 6th, the DOJ announced the conclusion of their review of the particulars of Epstein's crimes and death. Since then, the public interest in Epstein has remained. You're damn right it has. Given this long-standing and legitimate interest, well, that's nice. Thank you for saying that. The government now moves to unseal grand jury transcripts associated with Epstein. Now, they write, it is tradition of law that proceedings before a grand jury shall generally remain secret, right? This is true. The tradition of secrecy is not absolute, though, right? And this is a strong tradition. Like, grand jury transcripts are highly protected. Although the rules of criminal procedure generally list the exceptions to grand jury secrecy, the Second Circuit recognizes that there are special circumstances where we can even release it outside the appropriate boundaries of the rules. Okay, so the rules under Rule 6b3, Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, say there are certain reasons where we can disclose this if you need it. Public interest, not amongst them. Saying one such special circumstance, like the court said there could be other things that are outside the scope of the rules in the Second Circuit, historical interest by the public. In fact, in this case that we found, this court retains discretion to determine whether such interest outweighs the countervailing interest in privacy and secrecy, okay? So according to the law, even according to the DOJ, they say it's just a balancing test ultimately, and the judge gets to decide whether this meets public interest. My guess is going to be not. I hope so. I hope I'm wrong. Public officials, lawmakers, pundits, and ordinary citizens remain deeply interested and concerned about Epstein, no doubt. Indeed, other jurists have released grand jury transcripts after concluding that the Epstein case qualifies as a matter of public concern. In fact, here, this is good work. So they found this case from California. They're like, okay, there was another case, this LLC versus these people. They say, after all, Jeffrey Epstein is the most infamous pedophile in history. True. The facts surrounding Epstein's case tell a tale of national disgrace, said someone else in this case. The grand jury records are thus critical pieces of important moment in our nation's history in another case, and the time for public to guess what they contain should end. They say the privacy interest at stake on the other side of the balance are substantially diminished due to Epstein's death. Now, this is in the Gouveia case, right? So this is the Gouveia case. She's still alive. Of course, as noted, the DOJ will work with the Southern District of New York to redact all victims' information, while the government recognizes that Maxwell is currently on appeal before the Supreme Court, and nonetheless moves this court for relief due to intense public scrutiny in this matter. For these reasons, the court should conclude that Epstein and Maxwell's cases both qualify as a matter of public interest, release the associated grand jury transcripts, lift any pre-existing protective orders, which is great, and saying, give us this material, signed here by U.S. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche in the Ghislaine case. And a very similar filing we'll see in the Epstein case. Looks about 4 pages, much the same, but let's take a look at what is happening here because it's the Epstein case. Now, he is dead. Case is basically closed. At the direction of the Attorney General, we want the records. As the memo concluded, and so it's a little bit different, they say on July 6th, the DOJ and the FBI issued a memo, and we detailed the steps that we had taken and whether we could charge any third parties. And as the memo concluded, no such evidence was uncovered during the review. Now, since July 6, 2025, there's been extensive public interest in the basis for the memo's conclusion. Yeah, and given the public interest and the transparency, we moved to unseal the transcripts. And we're going to work to, with the Southern District of New York. We're not going to release any victims' names or anything like that. More background on Epstein. June 2nd, he was charged. August August 10th, he was dead, committed suicide. The court dismissed the indictment afterwards. Nothing came of it. On June 29th, Ghislaine got indicted. The jury found her guilty December, and she is now convicted and in prison. On July 6th, the DOJ and the FBI announced that we have concluded our investigation of Epstein, but the public interest still remains. And so given long-standing and legitimate interest in this, we should unseal it. A lot of the same case law from the prior letter, or prior filing. Public officials are deeply concerned. Even public officials are concerned. And other jurists have released the same records. We saw that in the prior. And so for these reasons, this court should conclude in a separate judge, in a separate case, that these are interests, public matters that are of public interest, and the records should be released. Signed by Todd Blanche, working for Pamela Bondi, the Deputy Attorney General there in the Southern District of New York. And so good developments there. We also see that the person who prosecuted these cases is furious. Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter, throwing a hissy fit on her way out the door after being fired. You can see Politico says she sent a nasty letter to everybody. Comey, who prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein, was fired from the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office amid public uproar over Diddy and Epstein. One day after being fired by the DOJ, Maureen Comey threw a temper tantrum. Oh, just like a typical prosecutor. She told her former colleagues in this email, probably, that fear is the tool of a tyrant, appearing to take aim at upper DOJ. This according to a copy of a memo that she sent to the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office. So she blasted everybody in an email. Referring to the office's long-standing motto of operating without fear or favor, Comey, who's the daughter of James Comey and prosecuted Epstein, Ghislaine, and Diddy, told her former colleagues in a note, she said the following: "We have entered a new phase where without fear may be the challenge." Oh, cram it, Maureen. If a career prosecutor can be fired without reason, fear may seep into the decisions of those who remain. Do not let that happen. Fear is the tool of a tyrant, wielded to suppress independent thought, says Maureen Comey, whose dad ran the FBI. Instead of fear, let this moment fuel the fire that already burns at the heart of this place. A fire for righteous indignation at abuses of powers, of commitment to seek justice for victims, of dedication to truth above all else. They're so full of themselves and like detached from reality in America. It's crazy. They talk like this. Comey didn't immediately respond to her request for comment. She wrote her screed. As Politico reported, she disclosed that she wasn't provided a reason for her termination, news of which was just summarily conveyed to her. You're gone. Well, it might be because your dad was involved in a corrupt coup with Obama and Clapper and Brennan to interfere with this administration. Now, you really shouldn't be punished for the sins of your parents, but sounds like she's probably still quite close to the man and doesn't like him at all. And she's a pretty terrible prosecutor in that she only prosecuted Epstein and Comey, okay? She could have looked at anybody else in those indictments and prosecuted them, but she didn't because she's part of the cover-up. We think she's part of the cleanup operation, actually. Now, she's furious. We were waiting to see how she came down on this because I think it would be instructive on what her role was. And I think this reveals her role. Her role was to continue to be a mole in the agency, in the Justice Department, and to continue to cover up for the honeypots. Diddy was just the last one. So they fired her after that case. In her parting message, she wrote that her nearly 10 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office was making sure people with access, money, and power were not treated differently than anyone else. Tell that to your coup father who deserves to be in prison. And making sure this office remains separate from politics. Get out of here. Fear, she wrote, was really never conceivable. Okay, so she's fired. She's going to go work at some stupid lefty law firm, get paid even more money. But she won't have access to those security credentials that her and her daddy, coup father, happen to love so much. So we're happy to see it. Good riddance to her, and happy to have the DOJ reformed. Maybe we'll get some actual prosecutors who can actually prosecute cases and not let Epstein die in jail, not let Ghislaine be the only person prosecuted for the conspiracy that you guys alleged, not me. You wrote it. Jeffrey Berman wrote it in his 2019 indictment of Jeffrey Epstein at the DOJ. Then he was fired. I don't know why. By Trump and Bill Barr. After Epstein was dead, and now he's working in private practice. So why was he fired too? I don't really know. But Maureen Comey, hopefully probably calling her daddy right there. Dad, you're not gonna believe it. What happened, honey? Let's go walk on a beach. Pathetic. All right, go get a real job.